funny.
We are talking The Night Eats the World, aka La nuit dévoré le monde. So that's my French interpretation. And yes, this is a French movie directed by first-time feature director Dominique Rocha. However, it is in English language, and to be honest with you, there's not a lot of dialogue in it anyway. So this is a zombie movie, and is reminiscent of 28 Days Later, if you're a kind of a film fan, but to me it felt most like a kind of unofficial adaptation of the novel I Am Legend, which of course has been made into a movie multiple times now. And if you're familiar with the actual book rather than the film adaptations of I Am Legend, the whole point of that book was the protagonist ultimately was the last of his kind. He kind of felt like he was the outcast, so to speak, because there was just simply a world filled with these creatures. In the book it was kind of vampires, and in this it's kind of these kind of zombie creatures. And there's even a few lines of dialogue where he's kind of talking to himself that more or less says it. Now this is actually based on a novel itself by Pitt Argument, but I'm not familiar with that actual novel itself. But it does seem somewhat derivative of the novel, of course, by Richard Matheson, I Am Legend. Anyway, let's get on with the actual plot, shall we? So it focuses on this man who ends up going to this party in, he's American, but he's in France somewhere, and he goes to this party, and he kind of ends up falling asleep while he's kind of waiting for his ex-girlfriend to kind of like come and talk to him. Falls asleep in this kind of like quiet room at the end of the hall. However, when he wakes up, he finds out that in the night there's been some type of zombie outbreak, and pretty much everyone at the party has been either disappeared, killed, or turned into zombies. And ultimately, obviously, much to his surprise, he has to kind of fight them off, and ends up it's a tale of kind of survival and isolation, as obviously he's trying to kind of deal with this kind of new world and obviously find ways to keep his kind of mind engaged. So, unlike a lot of kind of zombie films, this doesn't really deal with necessarily a lot to do with the zombies. It's more the movie is dealing with how someone kind of copes with isolation, and ultimately what that effect it has on the kind of the human mind in the kind of the backdrop of this kind of zombie apocalypse. Of course, there are a variety of kind of zombie sort of set pieces and action sort of sequences, but nonetheless, the bulk of the movie is simply this one guy on his own dealing with stuff. So there's not a lot of dialogue. He's on his own. He ends up talking to this one zombie that was kind of caught in this kind of like cage lift thing, but there's not a huge amount of dialogue within this movie. So let's discuss. So it's kind of an interesting zombie, and one of the kind of things that makes it unique is the way the zombies are completely silent. So in a lot of zombie films they'll kind of moan and groan and stuff like that. And here they're kind of, there's no vocalization from them. So it makes them seem pretty eerie, I've got to say. And all the zombies are reasonably sort of fresh. Obviously there's a few kind of scars and wounds and stuff. And there's some quite sort of graphic scenes where we have ones with limbs that have been ripped off and stuff like that. The effects all look pretty good, but it's quite haunting the way these kind of zombies are just kind of silent and kind of like gnashing their teeth and stuff, but without really kind of vocalising it. So it does make some sort of quite good some imagery here. And when we do see exterior shots, which to be fair are on the minimum, obviously this kind of like this wrecked cityscape looks suitably apocalyptic. So I did kind of like the kind of the world building here. You never really know what's going on. You don't really know what's causing. It's all from this one sort of character's point of view, and ultimately how he's kind of like dealing with stuff and ultimately trying to survive. There is some human interaction. Well, I kind of spoil it for you, but nonetheless, it is kind of more or less one man's journey. Now, I will say this, I've seen some reviews of this film, and a lot of people think it's a very boring film because it simply is just a guy hunkering down in this kind of apartment complex. And that, in a way, is true, because there's really not a lot of plot progression here, to be quite honest. It really is just this one guy trying to survive, and his kind of like descent into kind of like madness via kind of isolation, so to speak. So I can understand the criticisms where people might say it's just kind of boring, it's just what, you know, one guy fanning around in an apartment. And I'll be honest with you, he makes some particularly bad decisions, and I'm not talking ones that are made in panic or on the fly. You know, there's premeditated decisions that this character makes, which I think are particularly stupid given the circumstance. But there you go, you have to watch kind of the film to sort of find out. So it's a different kind of zombie film. I thought the acting was pretty good. I mean, it's the first time feature director, but I thought he did a good job here of kind of like of giving you a kind of you know, an intriguing movie that where you kind of, you know, you're kind of invested in the kind of this world and obviously what's going to happen to this character, despite the fact that really not a lot actually happens. But you know, what we do see is very well realised. There is a bit of a kind of a twist in the movie, which I'm kind of obviously I'm not going to spoil for you here. But I'm going to say, if you're a fan of kind of the 28-day style later zombies, even though this is less on the action side, this is almost, you can almost watch this as a companion piece. It's particularly if you kind of you know, watch the end of the 28 weeks later and where that ended up. It kind of almost feels like it's a natural progression to that sort of story, although I don't think it's anything to do with it. And again, if you're a fan of I Am Legend, then you may want to check it out. And it almost seems like an unofficial version of that movie, particularly when we have this kind of these lines of dialogue with this character. He's more or less saying that sort of thing, but not quite verbatim. Yeah, so it's maybe not the most interesting of zombie films, and you know, there's not a whole lot going on, and some of the stuff that happens is a little bit eye-rollingly like, why did you do that? I don't understand the logic of what would happen there. And you may not feel you got a lot out of it, but I've got to say it's a well-made film, and I think the zombie effects are very effective when we do see these kind of attacks. They are kind of pretty horrific, and there are some kind of quite, you know, quite graphic scenes of kind of violence and stuff like that. So it's a different sort of style of zombie film. I know that the zombie films have been done to death at this made, so it's kind of good where we have these kind of slight kind of variations of the story that we've seen a few of kind of within kind of recent years. So, you know, maybe things, if you enjoyed the movie Cargo, then again it's a kind of a slightly different take on the zombie genre, you may want to check it out. But I would say it's probably worth a watch for zombie fans. But if you want high octane, you know, action and gore and stuff like that, then maybe not. But I'll give this movie a 7 out of 10. I actually think it's quite a well-made film, and I actually enjoyed it, but I understand maybe if people didn't like it so much. So 7 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.